Sing along if you like.
This is the accordion that my grandfather got me when I was in 3rd grade, and it's sort of the step up from the beginner that has about 12 bass keys. Well, this has many, many more, and it's the adult size, so you feel you're really moving up in the accordion world.
Well, we did a concert in Chicago Stadium. All Polish people, 20,000 of them came to see me. We raised money for the Polish Alliance, and Mayor Daley came that night, and I had him sing a little bit of the Moja droga Jaceko, and he sang it pretty good for an Irishman. The next day when he had his press conference, he was supposed to have been at a meeting with the King of Sweden. And he didn't show up. I mean, it was really an insult to Sweden, and the press and the media love to jump on things like this. Why weren't you with the King of Sweden? He came especially to be with you to Chicago, and you didn't show up. I mean, that's unheard of. He says, well, I was with Bobby Witten, the Polish prince, because there's a lot more Polish people in Chicago than are Swedish. I don't know. But it hit the front page of the Chicago Tribune. I remember that next morning I was leaving town. I happened to look at the airport at the counter, and there it said real big, on the front page of the Chicago Tribune, Bobby Witten, Polish prince, proclaimed by Mayor Daley. And it stayed with me all these years.
I had this fabulous experience of being allowed to be served Mass by the Pope, our Polish Pope. It occurred in Rome quite a few years ago. And I arrived late. What was organized for Robert Wagner and his family and Lionel Stander and I, because we were on our way to film Heart to Heart in Greece. We were going to meet in Rome. We were going to organize our trip so that we could all be together and have a meeting with the Pope. And in those days, it was, at that time of year, it was in the summer, and the Pope was resident at Castello Gandolfo outside the city. And we had one day a week, he was coming into the city to do his public audience, and we had seats reserved in the reserved area where he would get off of the Pope mobile, and he would come and shake hands to everybody and get your picture taken and all this. Well, unfortunately, I was filming something, and I arrived late. Too late to go through all the security and get on time to the spot where I was supposed to be, along with everybody else, to shake hands. So I was distraught, and I called Father Sokołowski, who handles the Polish mafia that comes there, and I said, what can I do? I mean, I'm so terribly sorry, but I couldn't control the airlines. And he said, well, let me see what I can do. He organized for me to be able to go with a small group of Polish pilgrims who had come to stay at the Polish home in Rome, and we're going to attend a Mass personally given by the Pope at Castello Gandolfo, 7 o'clock in the morning. Could I be there? Oh, my heart was palpitating. My goodness, this was much more than I had expected. But he said, by the way, the Mass is in Polish. I'm sure I must have done a Mass in Polish, but it was beyond my memory. So it was lodged somewhere in the folds of my brain, because when we entered, there couldn't have been more than 25 of us. We were shown by the Swiss Guards through a beautiful gallery overlooking a garden where we were installed, and there was a simple table with a cloth on it and a crucifix, and the Pope came in. I was pushed up to the front by Father Sokołowski, I didn't want to be up at the front because I certainly didn't want to be caught not knowing what I was saying. And the entire group of people began singing. They were the most beautiful voices. So I think I was either crying or singing or doing something throughout the entire Mass. And somehow, from somewhere, out it came. Ojcze nasz, któryś w święci imię Twoje, przyjdź królestwo Twoje. With the Lord's Prayer, out it came. That was one of the biggest surprises of my life, because I never really remember studying it. I just remember being in church and saying it, but I don't remember where I learned it. And I know I never made an active effort to learn it. So somehow it's either genetic or it's somehow stuck in there.
Letter writing was very important in order to induce this great immigration. But actually, the letters that people were receiving from their own relatives, sometimes from their brothers, sisters, these were considered to be very, very reliable pieces of information.
They allowed someone to inform their family that they had safely arrived, which was probably the most important thing that people wanted to hear. But also at the same time, the letter writing encouraged other people to come over. And like we have chain letters, but in a different sense, this caused a chain migration of coming over.
You have to realize that there was a great effort by steamship line companies, for example, to encourage immigration to America, because just as today we have all kinds of commercials on television about flights to Europe and to Asia and everywhere else, these steamship lines were doing a big public relation job even in the most remote villages, and they were the ones who were exaggerating about conditions in America. But the information that was received from an uncle, from a father, from a brother, was information that was considered reliable. They didn't lie about the situation.
In our archives, we have sample books on how to write letters, how to tell people, for instance, how to send best wishes, how to write a marriage proposal, all these things, because we are dealing with a society that was semi-literate, and of course by being able to read they could copy the thing and increase their literacy and sophistication. But the letters did serve that purpose of keeping the contact with the family back in the old country.
One of the things that impressed the Polish peasant farmer was the fact that the people writing in the letters would say, "This is a place where you can eat meat every day." Now, eating meat in the villages, in the Polish villages, was something that happened at major holidays, either during Easter time or during Christmas time. But you didn't eat meat very, very often. But when somebody wrote to you, "Wow, this is a place where you can eat meat every day and it's inexpensive and it doesn't cost very much," that was very impressive. Now, today we know that they were probably better off not eating too much meat. But the fact is that that made a very great impression on the Polish villagers.
My father was an officer in the Polish Merchant Marine. He was on the training ship Dar Pomorza in 1939 when the war broke out. He couldn't return to Poland because Gdynia, the seaport, was blockaded. And the training ship went first to Sweden, and the students from the training ship went to Southampton. So my father actually finished his maritime studies at the University of Southampton. And he was on Polish ships. He was an officer on Polish ships during the war. When, after VE Day, he transferred to American ships and was an officer on American ships, so, because we were still fighting our war with Japan. After the war, he couldn't go back to Poland because as an officer, he would have faced arrest by the communists, which was a shame because my father had had a brilliant career ahead of him had there been no war. And he came from a very well-to-do family, plus the fact that he would have been an officer, his life would have been completely different. But we all know so many people's lives were changed by that war. He met my mother when they were both attendants at her friend's wedding. Her friend was also marrying a Polish merchant marine officer. And sometime after that, he asked her if he could write to her. So she said, oh, yeah, you know, patriotic duty, yes, okay, you can write to me. And he asked her for her name. And my mother's maiden name was a very difficult one to spell, even for Poles. And he wrote it down correctly immediately. And she said, well, how did you know that? And he said, well, because I have a great aunt by that name. And she kind of stopped and said, uh-huh, sailor girl in every port, he's handing me a line. She said, oh, really? Where? In Lublin. She said, she had a great aunt by that name in Lublin. What street? Jesuitska, Jesuit Street. She said, my God, I think that's where my great aunt lives. She went home, she asked my grandfather, and he says, yes, she just lives in Jesuitska Street in Lublin. So it turns out that, yes, in fact, it was the same person. My father was related to her by marriage, whereas she was my mother's great aunt in a direct line. So there was a relationship there, and of course, I guess it was meant to be because they were married not too long after that.
Stan Musial, one of baseball's immortals, is retiring after a fabulous career that spanned 22 years. Stan the man has a unique corkscrew batting stance, a style that enabled him to chalk up an incredible lifetime batting average of .332. In the field, he is fleet-footed and eagle-eyed. He gives every play all he's got. Circus catches are routine to Stan. At St. Louis Cardinal picnic, his fellow players are taken by surprise at the announcement. He spent all of his 22 years in big league baseball with the Cards and will now take a front office job. Also moved to tears is Mrs. Musial, the Lil who cheered his successes, shared his disappointments. When this season closes, baseball fans will no longer thrill to scenes like these. This is but one of 472 home runs Stan hit during his career. The last innings for a man who brought greatness to our national sport. When the cheers fade away, there will always remain fond memories of Stan Musial. Stan, the man.
I've always thought that my love of horses must come from somewhere, and there is a very strong connection between the Poles and horses. Almost more than anything else, a gentleman is never a gentleman unless he has a horse. In Poland today, there are two great breeding stations that preserve the Polish-Arabian bloodline. This is a long history of Arab blood and the mixture of European horses and the Przezalski horse, and all. It goes way, way back. And there is a fabulous story on what was done in order to preserve these horses. Through the First World War, through the Second World War, there was an incredible effort made to preserve these horses. What you now see in Poland and what you now see somewhat in America, certainly in the bloodstock which has been brought to America in the last 20 years from Poland, is a really beautiful example of the cavalry horse that was used by the Polish cavalry. That was one of their greatest achievements militarily. And the love of the Poles and their horses is something that is, it's almost second, I mean, probably only second to their love of their religion and their church.
You know, it was a funny thing. When I recorded Roses Are Red, it really didn't sound that good. Nobody wanted to play it. It wasn't that good of a record. I was in New York, walking down the street, tried everything, tried payola, tried gifts, anything that would get somebody to play the record. They wouldn't do it. I walked past St. Patrick's Cathedral. There was a light shining through it with the leaded glass window and a colored glass in the window, and it hit me like you'd see in the movies that I should go in. I came in, and I said, you know, I tried everything, but I never really prayed and asked God for a hit record. Let me try that. I mean, it's the simplest things. We've been friends a long time. Walked in. There were candles lit everywhere for all the different saints. I looked at one saint, Saint Espanol. Never forget this. No candles lit. I lit a candle, and I says, look, Saint Espanol, could you help me get a hit record? Roses Are Red. I know I'm not the world's greatest singer, but make it a hit. What does it matter to you? What's another miracle? And I prayed. I lit candles, and the record went to #1. It sounded better than it ever sounded. On a radio, I says, that's me singing? That's the record we recorded? And I did this for many of my hit records. I went back for Blue Velvet. Could you make Blue Velvet a hit? Saint Espanol, lit candles. Mr. Lonely, could you make me another #1 record? For 10 years, I did this, and I sold millions and millions of records. I had #1 records you couldn't believe, and after 10 years, I says, you know, I'm not going to ask you anymore. I mean, enough's enough. How many times can you go back to a friend and ask a friend for a favor? So I'm not asking you anymore. 2 months later, the record company dropped me. They says, it's over with for you. You don't sell records anymore. I didn't sell records. Nobody wanted me. The record company was over with. That's when I wrote and recorded Melody of Love. So I'm back in New York again, and once again, nobody wants Melody of Love. 7 record companies turned me down, and I'm walking past St. Patrick's Cathedral, and I says, hey, I know I told you I'd never come back because enough's enough, but how about one more, huh? And I looked at Saint Espanol, and I said, this one's going to be a little tough for you because it's half Polish. Not only are you trying to bring Bobby Vinton back onto the rock scene with contemporary music with a regular song, but I put Polish words to it. I could feel the saint going, ah. Anyway, I says, please, I mean, see what you can do. And I promise you I won't come back and ask again. Boom. 2 months later, Melody of Love, #1 record in America. I says, I can't believe this. Is this a miracle? Is this... I don't even talk about it this much because 90% of people out there won't even believe me, so why talk about it? So I says, look, I have to go back and thank Saint Espanola one more time, and that's it. I go back there, and I look, statue's gone. I says, where's the statue at? And there was a couple of workmen working, and he says, what statue? I said, the Saint Espanol statue that's been there for 10 years. He said, there's never been a statue there. I says, come on now, I mean, you put me on. He says, no, there's never, they said, what's the name of the saint? I said, Saint Espanol. I says, I remember it well because I was hoping that it was Saint Stanislaus, because Stanley's my real name, and so I always used to pray to Saint Stanislaus. But there was a Saint Espanol, nobody was there at the time, so I says, I don't understand. He says, look, we don't believe there's ever has been a Saint Espanol. We don't think there was ever a statue there, and we don't know what you're talking about. And boy, at the time, I says, is this some kind of miracle from God? But that was my career. I sold millions of records. I prayed to that saint, even for a Polish song. And when that Polish song became a hit again, I became very popular again. I started playing all the places in the casinos. I have my own theater today as a result of Saint Espanol and a Polish record.
When I was about 12 or 13, we had a young priest here in the parish who one day said to me, you know, I think that you might have a vocation to the priesthood. And he was right. It was something I was thinking about from perhaps when I was 7 or 8 years old. I thought about it at first. And he said, well, did you ever hear of this place called Orchard Lake? It's in Michigan, and they have a high school and a college and a seminary there, and it was founded in 1885 by the early Polish immigrants for both the education of those who would serve them as their priests and the education of men and women who would then serve the Polish-American community. I told him I'd never heard of it, and he said, well, I'll tell you what, why don't we get a couple of days and I'll take you out there and you can see the place and see if you like it. And we did that. And I went out there and I fell in love with the place immediately. And I eventually enrolled there and went to high school there and went to college there. And it was there that my love and knowledge of the Polish heritage and culture, both religious and otherwise, grew and deepened. Polish language was taught every day in high school. In college, we had many, many different classes. We had Polish language, we had Polish literature, we had Polish history, we had Polish American history, Polish American literature. You had a wide variety of classes from which to choose where you could deepen your knowledge of your culture. And I spent 7 wonderful years there. I would have stayed there for the seminary, only my bishop wanted me to come home and study here in New York. And I really do miss the Orchard Lake Schools. It's a wonderful, wonderful place where Polish heritage is preserved to this day.
When I went into politics, it was to stop a highway from coming through the older ethnic communities in the first African-American home ownership neighborhood in Baltimore. My family was apprehensive for me. I was iconoclastic. I was challenging the political machines that were run by other ethnic groups. And they knew I'd worked so hard to become a social worker, to get a master's degree in social work, which they were very proud of, the fact that I'd worked at Catholic Charities, that I was going to go get a doctorate in public health at Hopkins. So when I announced that I was going to run for city council, challenge the political machine, organize a grassroots organization, they were apprehensive. But once I broke those barriers, they were very proud, because through the groups I organized, I did help save the neighborhoods, and did help senior citizens be able to have senior citizen centers. And what they liked, essentially, it was the way my father taught me in the grocery store. We were retail, and every morning when grandmother would open the bakery or dad would open the grocery store, we would say to our neighbors, "Good morning, can I help you?" And that was the value that was instilled to me. So when I would open up the door of my city council office, and now as a United States Senator, my attitude is, "Good morning, how can I help you? What are the day-to-day lives of my constituents and how I can help them in public policy?" And so they were very proud of that.
There were some wonderful songs there were, let's see, there was one about a man in Krakow. Krakowia Czechcia, Malkuniku 7, pojechał na wojnę, pozostało jeden. Oj, dajna, dajna, oj, dajna. That was a cute little one. And then there was a beautiful song, a love song. Na pierwszy znak, it's called. Na pierwszy znak, gdy serce drgnie, ledwo drgnie, a już wiem, że to właśnie ten, tylko ten. Mnie tylko oczy zamglone pokaż, wtedy na pewno już wiem, że mnie kochasz. Na pierwszy znak, gdy serce drgnie, ledwo drgnie, a już wiem, że to właśnie ten, tylko ten. Ta-da.